Let's talk about the movie Barbie. I just watched this movie, man, and I have a lot of issues. There's just a lot of issues that stem from a movie that asks questions but fails to answer them, or the movie that asks the wrong questions and gives you the wrong answers. When you're watching the movie, we have Barbie coming into real life, right? And when she comes, men start to objectify her by looking at her. And I think at some point, one man actually gropes her and she punches him. And one of the things that I had an issue with is when this Barbie comes into the real world, the way they're dressed, they're in neon colors, which all of a sudden, if you're wearing neon colors in a mute society or in a mute space, people are gonna look at you, right? Because that's what you're wearing. It's more of look at me. I do not agree with the groping, but the main thing is when you're wearing something that makes you different, people are going to look at you. If you're behaving in a different way, people are going to look at you. And I think we now live in a society that wants us to ignore human tendencies where it's, hey, I'm doing this thing to attract your attention, but I don't want you to give me attention. And when you fail to adhere to that, you are wrong, which for me felt like that's what was being said within that scene. However, we also get to see the differences between how men and women react. When a man is being looked at, he's like, oh, I'm being admired. And then when a woman is being looked at, it's like, oh, I'm being objectified. And I think that one of the challenges we have with that point of view also is sometimes as men, when you are looking at a woman, you're looking from a point of admiration, like you're actually admiring the beauty within a person, and that person feels objectified, right? And none of those views is wrong. And I think that what we should be doing is having a conversation in terms of what does it mean when you do this, and then we're able to create a platform where we can understand each other and then be open, rather than just being like, hey, when men do this, it's objectifying women, and then we force men to suppress how they feel, which ultimately results in bad apples occurring when things happening whereby some men will not help you. They'll be like, hey, I didn't do it, he did it. And then we don't really understand why he did it, because we are in this world whereby it's, hey, this is how women feel, this is how men feel. And then we don't have conversation. I feel like movies like this have the power and potential to allow us to come and have a conversation. We move forward from that to whereby this movie, it raises a lot of questions, right? It raises a lot of ideas of what's the objective of Barbie. Over the years, the biggest controversy of Barbie has always been most women aspire to be like Barbie. And I feel like in that moment, we have a problem because the way these toys are designed, I don't think, and I'll speak for myself, but when you were a young man playing with G.I. Joes, I don't think anyone ever grew up being like, I want to be ripped like this G.I. Joe, or you ever had an identity crisis. I don't think anyone looks at the door and says, I wish I was like Barbie. I think one of the problems is in the marketing and how we market these toys. Who defines or determines that Barbie is the standard of beauty? Who did that? And that person is the person that we have to hold accountable and we have to have conversations with, because that's the person who created issues. It's not necessarily that we should say, oh, okay, let's do away with Barbie now. Let's bring in this new thing, right? Let's bring in this new idea, and then all of a sudden everything will work out for us. It's not something that I sort of agree with. I disagree a lot with that point. Barbie has feet that are in the shape of a 3-inch heels, and how is that ever going to be realistic? Most women could not walk like that, right? And I think that there is a valid question to be asked whereby we cannot suppress it, but also we also have to be realistic in our arguments and have intellectual conversations. Otherwise, it's just absurd that a plastic toy can determine someone's future, someone's life. The other thing is that the movie asks, when you're watching it, you're like, what's the point of Will Ferrell's character? What is he there for? What are those executives there for? Do they represent the corporate greed? Do they represent the corporate structure? And then what's their character arc? What do they achieve? At one point, they are presented as this capitalist people who just want money, but at a certain point, when Will Ferrell is told, "Hey, Ken Doe is making more money," he's like, "No, we still have to save the Barbie world." It's like, if all he wanted was money, why is he just rushing to save Barbie world? And how is he going to? By taking out the humans within. So Will Ferrell's character and the executives, their goal is to go get the mom and daughter out of Barbie world so that they can close this thing. But all of a sudden they go in and we don't see them until the end. And then they don't necessarily get the mom and daughter out of there. And then all of a sudden, the lady that made Barbie comes in, and we've forgotten that these people have to leave and the portal has to be closed. And we have so many questions. Is at what point do they leave? At what point, what happens to the portal? Does this portal open? How was it opened? What happens? What are the consequences of this? What, like, there's more questions than answers. And then all of a sudden Barbie is in the real world. And for me, man, I feel like if you watch Oppenheimer, it's going to be very difficult for you to watch Barbie. And I feel if you haven't watched either and you plan on watching both movies, you should watch Barbie first and then Oppenheimer to save yourself some intellectual brain cells. Because this movie, man, I really felt like it's a stupid movie. Like, no offense. It raises questions, doesn't answer them. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful design. It's a it has it's great in the things that make a movie great as a spectacle, but from an intellectual point of view, it fails, man. It fails a lot, and it doesn't deliver on what it promises you. The main theme of the movie, or the theme that they state in the beginning of the movie, is this idea of irrepressible thoughts surrounded by death and cellulite, and that thing of just being a normal human being that you go through. And it doesn't answer those questions in terms of how do you solve those issues by the end of it. And you go from the opening picture of kids playing with babies to the closing picture of Barbie going to a gynecologist, and you're like, wait, what? Like, what are we doing? And I think that the politics of Barbie are also a little bit weird, because one of the things that happens when Ken comes back to rule Barbie world is he introduces patriarchy. And patriarchy is seen as a bad thing, which is what the movie is trying to say, is patriarchy is a bad thing. When it's done, this is what happens. But what you see is how a lot of these Barbies sort of enjoy themselves. They all enjoy, it pushes it and says, look at this, women are serving men, how bad it is. But there's a character in that quote who says, oh, I don't have to think anymore. My brain is like this. And then they use men's desire to protect women as a weakness that men have. Like, at some point they're like, hey, if you just tell them you didn't understand the Godfather, they'll explain it to you. And I understand that there are things that in general women are not happy with men about. And those are conversations that are worth having. But I think that one of the problems that the movie has is, rather than opening up a discussion, it sort of just throws away the conversation. So there's no conversation that can occur, because there's no need to understand, like, oh, if you pretend that you cannot play a sport, they will do it to help you. A lot of times men do these things to impress women. A lot of times men do these things because they're trying to be helpful. And then if you make a joke or a mockery of that desire of someone trying to connect with you, it becomes a problem. Ken in the whole movie wants to connect with Barbie, but Barbie doesn't want that connection, which is something that I feel like, if that's the message that women are trying to send to men, that you suffocate us by wanting to connect with us, then message delivered. Because that's what I got out of it. Ken has one goal. His goal is to be with Barbie. He wants her. He wants to have a relationship. And I think that is an objective of a lot of men, where you want to have a family, you want to have kids. And I think we now live in a society and in a world where women feel like they don't want that. That's what I take from this movie, is women do not want family. They do not want relationships. They do not want men. They just want to live in a world by themselves, which, if that's the communication that we're supposed to take out of this movie, then fair and fine. But then the fact that at the end of the movie, Barbie is like, I think I want to go live in the real world where men, quote unquote, run the world. It leaves you with many questions than answers, because it's like, what do you want? You have to want something, and you have to know what that is, because you cannot have it all. You cannot have it both ways. If you want a female ran world, then stay in Barbie world, because you guys rule it. And out here in the real life, it's not perfect. And we humans have an expiry date. We're not just an idea. We have these experiences, but we choose to live, and we choose this world because that's what works for us for now. I think in an ideal world, I guess women get to be women, men get to be men. But I don't think I agree with that world. I feel like we need connection. I think that's what makes us human. Community is what makes us human. And I think that procreation is what makes us human. So the movie in me is confused. I feel like the way they wrote it, they were all confused, whoever was involved in it. I love Greta Gerwig, don't get me wrong. But this movie, the conversations that it leaves us with is a lot of, what is this movie about? What is it trying to say? Who is this movie for? It's confusing, it's confused, and it fails in many parts to say what it's trying to say, which is absolutely nothing.